Sometimes, the most beautiful letters are not sent in envelopes. They're carried inside the heart. Tonight's story isn't about kings or war or power. It's about someone quiet, someone who didn't shout but made a difference. Maybe they carried a letter. Maybe they planted a garden. Maybe they just listened. They didn't make headlines, but they left behind a warm feeling like sunlight in an old room. So if you're feeling tired or just want to slow down, you're in the right place. Take a deep breath, lower the lights, lie back, and let the story wrap around you softly, slowly like a blanket. And if this brings you peace, you can like the video and subscribe to the channel too, because some stories aren't made to wake us up, they're made to help us rest. It was still dark, not the kind of dark that scares, but the kind that hugs the world gently before the sun arrives. A small village lay quiet, no horns, no footsteps, just the soft sound of leaves moving in the breeze. And somewhere in that peaceful stillness, a bell rang. Not loud, just a small ring said like a whisper. A bicycle wheel turned, old, slow, but steady. The postman had begun his journey. Before the birds even started singing, before the doors unlocked, before tea was made. He didn't wear a uniform with shiny buttons, just a simple shirt, and a shawl wrapped tightly across his chest. The morning air was cold, but he never seemed to mind. Over his shoulder, a large leather bag. Heavy, but not because of weight, because of what it carried. Letters, not just paper, but pieces of people, dreams, wishes, regrets, goodbyes. He didn't ride fast, no rush, no noise. His cycle made soft sounds on the stone path, click, creak, ring. That was his music. Sometimes a dog would notice him and wag its tail. Sometimes a window would blink with a sleepy candlelight. But most of the time, he passed through a world that hadn't woken up yet. And he liked it that way. He stopped at the first gate. It was an old wooden one, paint-chipped, hinges tired. He didn't knock. He never did. He quietly opened his bag, reached inside and pulled out a letter, wrapped in old paper, tied with thread. He placed it gently on the doorstep, like setting down something holy. Then he bowed his head slightly, just for a moment, as if saying a silent prayer. Then he moved on. The path was long, muddy in some places, dusty in others, but he never complained. He had done this every morning, for as long as anyone could remember. Some said they couldn't even imagine a morning without him. He was always there, like the mist, like the sound of a rooster, like the smell of wet earth. In his bag the letters waited. Some were written in perfect ink, some had tear marks, some were wrinkled, as if they had been held too tightly. Each one had a story, a soldier writing to his mother, a little girl sending a drawing to her grandma, a young wife waiting for her husband's promise. To the world he was just a postman, but to those who waited he was more than that. He was the bridge between two hearts, between two faraway breaths, and he never broke that bridge. He reached the second house, this time a small cottage. The paint was blue, a flower pot sat near the step. He smiled quietly. This house always made him pause for a second. He remembered the old man here, who once gave him warm tea on a cold winter morning. That man had passed away last year, but the letters still came from his son in the city, and the old woman still waited, every morning, at the same window, with the same hope. The postman took out the letter, neatly written. The paper smelled slightly of rose. He placed it near the door and softly tapped the bell. Just once, then left, without waiting. Behind him, a curtain moved. A wrinkled face appeared, eyes soft, tired but all warm. She looked down, saw the letter, and smiled. She didn't run to pick it up, she just kept looking at it, like someone looking at an old photograph and not touching, just feeling. And somewhere as the sky began to turn a gentle blue, the postman kept riding, through dreams, through silence, through little stories tucked in envelopes. Some people read letters and forget them, but the postman? He carried each letter in his heart. Behind every door was a story, and that story walked with his bicycle, sometimes through mud, sometimes in sunlight, sometimes under the drip of rain. Once he read an old letter, a boy writing from the front lines to his mother. "Ma, if I never return, know that the smell of your roti stayed with me even in the coldest nights of war." The postman had read that letter out loud because the mother couldn't read. Her hands trembled, but her eyes glowed, as if for a moment her son had come home. She didn't say much, just placed the letter under her pillow as if it were her child. And the postman stepped away quietly, not wanting to disturb the moment. Later he passed by that home again. A small clay lamp still flickered near the window. Perhaps she kept it burning for her son. Perhaps she believed letters carried light too. Another letter had nothing but a tiny pencil sketch and of a son. A little boy had drawn it, whose father worked in the city. "I'm sending Papa the sun," he had said, "so when he feels alone he can look at it and smile." The postman had kept that letter safe because it held something more tender than words. He remembered placing it gently in the father's hands far away in a noisy street corner. The man opened it, paused, and smiled like a boy. He held the drawing to his chest, as if it was made of gold. And then he quietly wiped a tear from his cheek and folded the letter as if folding his son into a hug. Sometimes he saw a door that hadn't opened in years, but still received a letter every month. "Don't forget to read this, Baba," it would say. He would leave the letter there gently and wonder, had anyone hugged that old man lately? Or were these letters the only threads keeping him tied to the world? Sometimes the postman would sit outside that gate just for a minute, just to listen to the silence, as if even silence carried a message. Once the old man opened the door, just a crack. He didn't say anything, but he nodded, and the postman nodded back, as if two messengers of silence had finally spoken. Letters were not just ink and paper, they were feelings. Some carried the scent of old ink, some had candle soot, some envelopes had tiny hand-drawn flowers, some were pressed with wax seals and smelled faintly of rose oil. Each one was a story not written with colours but with emotion. He would run his fingers over the edges, like tracing someone's memory. Even the way a letter was folded told him something about the person who wrote it. Sometimes he'd find a pressed petal inside, or a torn corner with a doodle of someone waving goodbye. Every letter had weight, not of paper but of heart. Sometimes it rained. The postman never let the letters get wet. He would wrap them in his shawl, hold them to his chest, like a mother shielding her child. Once, in a sudden downpour, he found shelter under an old neem tree. There he waited, speaking softly to the letters, as if calming frightened birds. When the rain passed, he checked each one, patted them dry, and rode on. People used to say he held a letter the way a priest holds a flame. Another time, a child saw him take off his own scarf to cover an envelope soaked in rain. "Why?" she asked. He smiled and said, "Because this might be the only voice someone is waiting for." One evening, a visitor from the city came to the village. He asked, "Why do you do this, waking so early, riding so far, just to deliver some paper?" The postman smiled and softly replied, "These aren't just paper. They are dreams. Every letter holds someone's waiting, and to deliver that waiting is my duty." The visitor didn't reply. He watched as the postman pedalled away, silently wondering, when was the last time someone had written a letter to him? That night, he sat down in the guest house and wrote a letter to his sister. He hadn't done that in 10 years. Quietly, the postman resumed his journey. Every turn held a memory. Every path, a face. Every envelope, a breath. A woman who placed fresh flowers on her window, waiting for news. A child who rushed barefoot down the lane, asking if her father had replied. A teacher who received a poem from a student she had once scolded. A man who read a letter and wiped his eyes behind a curtain. And once, a girl who opened an envelope and found a dried daisy inside. She smiled, not because of what it said, but because it reminded her of a promise made under a yellow tree. And as his bicycle turned toward the next village, his bag was a little lighter. But his heart, a little fuller. He carried letters for everyone, but no one ever sent one for him. Every morning before the sun rose, he would wake up, light a small lamp and check his own name on the empty table, just to be sure, but nothing ever changed. People waited for him, but no one waited with him. He brought joy to homes, but when he returned to his own, there was no sound, just a quiet kettle and the slow creak of the window. Some said he had no family, others said he once did, but the letters never came in time. One said he used to write poems as a boy, tiny ones on the back of matchboxes. Another said he once received a letter and never opened it. Maybe it hurt too much. Maybe the silence inside it was louder than words. He smiled often, but it was the kind of smile that felt like a folded blanket, soft but hiding something. Even the children noticed. "Postman uncle," one asked, "who writes you letters?" He laughed, then paused, and said, "I guess the sky does, every evening, when the sun sends her colours." The child didn't understand, but she smiled anyway, because sometimes people understand feelings without understanding words. Once during winter he sat under a tree, not moving. Someone walked by and saw the letters still in his bags and pole, but his hands were open as if he was holding something invisible. When asked what he was doing, he whispered, "Just waiting, for a name that no one calls anymore." He had a box, tied with old red thread, kept near the corner of his room. No one saw what was inside, but a boy once peeked and said there were only 3 things: a letter with no name, a broken watch, and a pressed yellow flower. Maybe those were his stories. Maybe they were dreams he never spoke aloud. One evening, as the fog rolled in, he delivered his last letter of the day. A man asked, "Why do you never talk about yourself?" The postman looked up, his eyes soft like rain on glass, and said, "Because this story was not meant to be written, it was meant to be passed on. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words." He never asked questions, he never judged stories, he never told anyone how heavy his own heart felt. He just carried, not just letters, but grief and hope and the soft, quiet things people forget to say out loud. One night he stopped near a small temple. There was no one there, but he left a folded envelope beside the steps. The wind picked it up gently and placed it near a candle. Inside the letter was a single line: "Even if no one remembers me, I still remember them all." And maybe that's what made him different. He didn't need to be known. He just wanted others to be remembered. He didn't want to be loved loudly. He just hoped someone someday might whisper his name with a smile. As his bicycle rolled through sleepy lanes, he became more than a postman. He was a keeper of silences, a collector of forgotten names, a gentle bridge between people and peace. And when he passed by, flowers seemed to bloom without waiting for spring. The sun had barely risen. Mist floated across the fields. Birds were slow to sing, as if even they were waiting. But something was different. That morning, the postman did not come. No squeaky wheels, no footsteps on the gravel path, no soft knock at the gate. Just silence and the rustle of unopened letters. In one small home, a child looked down the lane. "He's late," she whispered. But no one replied, because in many homes, people were thinking the same thing. He never misses a day. Maybe the weather held him back, but the sky was clear, and the road empty. Later that day, a man from the post office arrived. He brought a few envelopes, but no bicycle, no smile, only a cold typed note: "Your postman has retired." But no one believed it, because he would never leave, without one last letter, one last wave. So they waited. 1 day, 2, a week, still nothing. And then something strange began. Old letters began to appear, in drawers, in baskets, under pillows, inside books. Each one was faded, sealed with wax, softly scented, as if waiting for just the right moment. One woman found a letter tucked in a book. It read, "To the one who makes the best tea, thank you for that rainy afternoon, when you shared your silence with me." She smiled through tears, not because it was sad, but because someone remembered. Another man, rough, quiet, found a note in his toolbox. "I hope your hands still build what the world forgets to value. You fix more than things, you know." He closed the box and sat still, for the first time in years. Even the children received letters. The girl who once asked, "Who writes you letters?" found one beneath her pillow. Said, "You do, every time you smile at the sky." She didn't fully understand, but she hugged the paper, like a small blanket. These weren't letters, they were memories. Moments someone had carried, softly, quietly, until it was time to give them back. Some say the postman disappeared, vanished. But maybe he just became part of the mist, of the wind, of the quiet hush at sunset. Maybe every time a letter arrives, with no name, it's him, still delivering, still remembering. An old woman once said, sitting on a bench with eyes closed, "I think he came by today. He didn't knock, but I heard the smile in the breeze." And in a drawer of the village post office, a small bundle was found, tied in red thread, a tag read, "To those who believe in quiet things." Inside were pages, poems, names, moments, written by a man who never told his own story. One poem said, "I walked without being seen, I listened without being known, I carried the world, one quiet hope at a time." At the bottom, a small drawing, a bicycle, and a letter flying in the wind. Maybe that's the kind of goodbye he wanted. Not loud, not final, just gentle, like a last letter, left on a doorstep, waiting to be opened, waiting to remind you you were never forgotten. And tonight, as you lie down and close your eyes, maybe you'll hear a soft wheel turn in the distance, or the quiet flap of a letter meant just for you, because some souls don't ask to be remembered. They simply leave behind a little warmth and a little wonder. And just like that, tonight's letter comes to a close. If you're still here listening, then maybe sleep has already started. To whisper at your window, maybe a memory stirred, maybe a feeling long forgotten, just quietly returned. Because when you truly listen to history, it doesn't shout, it sings. And if this story brought even a little warmth to your heart, then please leave us a little note in the comments. Tell us, did this story make you feel sleepy? If yes, just knowing that means the world to us. And hey, if this video helped you relax, then I'll do my best to bring you stories like this every night, right here on Good History for Sleep, where stories don't just teach, they soothe. We'll meet again soon with another soft letter, folded in emotion, delivered just for you. Until then, sleep well, dream gently, and remember, some stories don't wake us up, they put us gently to sleep.